Today I'd like to talk further about the true nature that we can experience during the practice. And whether you've experienced it or not, it's important to know about it in a theoretical way, whether you've experienced it this way or not. And we've mentioned from time to time that the yogi needs to observe at the moment of arising, at the moment that phenomena arise, and that only when the phenomena is observed at the moment of arising will the yogi see true nature or sabhava. So I'd like to talk about the true nature that can be observed at the moment of sense experience. And I spoke about this briefly, but I'm going to repeat it. I spoke about the example of what happens during hearing, and so I will begin by explaining that again. What is present at the moment of hearing is, first of all, the ear base. And by that, we mean not just the whole physical ear, the big ear itself, but the part within the ear that is necessary to hear something. When that receptor is healthy and complete, then a person can hear. And when it's broken or damaged, then hearing isn't possible. So there needs to be this receptor with the ear base, we call it, within the ear to be able to hear sounds. And there also must be sound waves. Sound waves strike the ear, and then a person hears. And this, we say a person hears, but what happens is hearing consciousness arises. And together with hearing consciousness, there is the contact between the sound and the mind that happens at the ear base. And at the moment of contact, if the sound is something that the hearer, the yogi likes, then it feels good to hear. There's a pleasant feeling. And if the sound is something that is not likable, then there's a kind of a bad contact that causes an unpleasant feeling. And there can also be neutral feeling, but these are not really perceptible to beginner yogis. They're not something that, so it's easier to just think about pleasant and unpleasant, and that later in the practice, for those who are just beginning, then it may be more apparent, the neutral feeling. The first two, the ear base and the sound wave, these are physical. And in Pali we call physical things, or matter, we call it Rūpa, just so you know. Hearing consciousness and hearing contact and hearing feeling, so hearing consciousness and the associated contact and feeling are mental. And they are, in Pali, the word for mental things is Nāma. And although this is a process, hearing is a process that is made up of component parts, we call it hearing, and the instruction is, when there's hearing, to place the attention at the ear and to make a note of it as hearing, hearing. To use this common word for the process helps concentration to arise. So although it's made up of parts, we note it as a whole thing. We put our attention on the whole thing and don't just pick out, don't just deliberately note, oh, this is hearing, or this is the sound, or this is the ear base, or this is the feeling, whatever. We just note it as a whole. And when we do that, the parts become apparent. An example of the process of how the parts become apparent when we note as a whole is that when we want to look at part of a person's face to know that particular part. We don't just pick that part out. What we need to do is look at the whole face. And when we look at the whole face, first of all, and be directly in front of that face, when we continue to look, the mind moves to some part. The mind moves to the eyes, and the mind knows the eyes. The mind moves to the nose and knows the nose. The mind moves to the chin and knows the chin. When we look at a whole, the mind goes to one point or another part by means of the mental factor of attention, which is called manasikara in Pali. So this kind of directs the mind from place to place when we look at something like the process of hearing. We note at the moment that hearing arises. So to be able to discern mind and matter, Nāma and Rūpa, at the moment of hearing, we have to prevent the mental defilements from arising. So we note the process as soon as it happens, and when we do that, the mindfulness or sati will get there first. If sati gets there first, then even though the sound is pleasant, there won't be any greed or desire arising for it. And even if the sound is an unpleasant sound, there won't be any anger arising. Sati is said to protect the mind so that greed and anger and other defilements cannot arise. It's important for greed and anger not to arise. And when sati protects the mind in advance, before they can arise, then the wholesome mind, wholesome vipassana consciousness can become like a continuous stream without any gap. And this is purity of mind. For that to happen, the yogi has to be ready to observe. So the mind should be active and alert and decisive. And this effort prevents laziness from happening. If the effort to observe is sluggish, then the mind can't get there at the very moment of arising. The effort to observe the object brings sati with it, and the mind won't go anywhere at all. It won't go anywhere else. And samadhi or concentration also arises. The factor of effort to observe the object prevents laziness, and sati or attention or mindfulness protects the mind so that defilements can't enter the stream of consciousness. And it makes the mind secure. And samadhi or concentration unifies the mind. And this makes the mind pure. And purity of mind is a necessary basis for developing knowledge, beginning with the discernment of mind and matter, or Nāma and Rūpa. It's similar in the moment of seeing. True nature, physical and mental true nature also arises in the moment of seeing. There's the eye base, and that is the part of the eye that is capable of receiving images. And there's also the visible object that strikes the eye base. We could also say, of course, in science we know that light strikes the eye. Light is what enters the eye. But in any case, when the visible object strikes the eye base, then seeing consciousness arises. And together with that, there is the contact between the mind and the visible object at the eye base. And together with the contact, following on the contact, there's the feeling of pleasant or unpleasant or neutral feeling. The eye base and the visible object are physical or Rūpa, and the seeing consciousness, contact, and feeling are mental or Nāma. When seeing happens, we note it as a whole, placing the attention on the eye and using the common word for the process, which is seeing, seeing, seeing. Although we note it as a whole, at times different parts of the whole will become apparent to us. And similarly, in the process of smelling, there's the nose base, which are the receptors for smell that are inside the nose. And there's the odor, which is carried on the wind, which enters the nose and strikes the receptors. When the odor strikes the nose base, then there's smelling consciousness. The odor is known, and there's contact between the mind and the odor at the nose base. And then there's a feeling, that either good or bad or neutral. When it is a fragrant or delightful smell, the contact is good. It's a good to smell, and a pleasant feeling accompanies the smelling. And when it's a foul, disgusting smell, it seems like a bad contact. It may not be apparent to you, but I had to translate this as bad to smell. And then there's an unpleasant feeling associated with that. If sati gets there first, then there won't be any anger arising due to the foul smell, and there won't be any greed arising due to the pleasant fragrance. If in fact anger or greed do arise, then just cure these, treat them, cure them by noting them. Angry, or desiring, and so on. They should be noted until they go away, the kilesas, if they do arise. At the moment of eating and drinking, there's also tasting that arises. And for taste to occur, on the tongue, there are receptors all over the tongue that are capable of receiving flavors, I should say. And then there's the tasteable object that is with food, that when we chew the food, the flavors emerge and reach the tongue, the receptors on the tongue. And the flavors of sweet or sour or hot, astringent, and salty or bitter. When these flavors emerge, they are known. There's taste consciousness, and following the taste, or together with the taste consciousness, there's tasting contact, and then the feeling of pleasantness or unpleasantness, or neutral feeling. We have to be careful when we're eating. When there are foods that we like, then we have to be careful so that enjoyment and longing, greed for these and the taste that we like doesn't arise, and also when it's food that we don't like or find disagreeable, we also, if we're deciding to eat it, then we need to be careful that anger doesn't arise over having to eat food that we don't find to our liking. And to mention regarding eating, it's helpful to note seeing the food before taking a bite, and then to observe the movements that we make to reach for the food and to bring it and put it into our mouth. Start from the moment of seeing to when we are eating the food. So reaching for the food, or reaching for the spoon, taking the spoon, bringing the food to our mouth, putting it in, removing the spoon, and then we begin to chew. Sometimes chewing is what is prominent. Sometimes tasting is what is prominent. So we note the thing that is prominent in the process. And after chewing it, you may find there's no taste left at all, but there's still something chewable, and you may continue to chew, and then being aware of this process of swallowing it down, and then bring the attention to the sitting before taking another bite. Actually, the eating process is one that, in the text it says that many people have become enlightened while they're eating. And this is written in the commentaries, that there's, in Sri Lanka, they have places where the monks would go to take their alms food, and sitting down at that eating platform or eating place, they would eat their food. And it is said that there is no eating place like that, at the monk's eating place, in which a person has not become an arahant. So, at least enlightened to the first stage. So try to just understand that eating is a process when the mind can be at ease and you interested in what it's doing. So it's good to be as mindful as possible. At the moment of tasting, there's the tongue base and the tasteable object, and these two are physical. There's tasting consciousness, contact and feeling, and these are mental. And then there's touching. And in the experience of touching, there's the body base. And the body base is very large. It's throughout the body, there are receptors for touch, both inside and outside of the body, wherever there is flesh or moisture that is inside the body or on the external part of the body. So the places that have no flesh or moisture, such as the hair, for example, or the finger and toenails, these are incapable of feeling touch. But all the other places that have moisture and flesh are capable of receiving tangible objects. And then there's the tangible object, and there are three kinds of tangible objects. There are tangible objects that are hard or soft or coarse or delicate. That's one kind of tangible object. Then the second type is felt as tightness or stiffness or movement. And the third is heat or warmth or coolness or cold. There is a lot of tangible matter within our bodies and on the outside of our bodies also. When something hard strikes the body base, then hardness is known. When something soft strikes the body base, then softness is known. If it's warmth that strikes the body base, then there's knowing of that warmth. There's touch consciousness of the warmth. When something is cold that strikes the body, then there's knowing of the coldness. And when there's something tight that strikes the body, then there's knowing of that tightness. And many other, of course, variations on these. So these tangible objects strike the body base and are known. That's touch consciousness that arises. Together with it, there is contact and feeling pleasant or unpleasant based on the contact. There are also mental, how should I say? There are also activities of mind that are, for example, images that arise in the mind, sounds that arise in the mind, things that are not really sights, not really sounds or smells or taste or touch, but they are as if being seen, as if being heard, as if being smelled or tasted or touched. They don't happen regarding, it's more what we call an imaginary object. So these objects arise at the heart base. And they should also be noted as they are, as even though it's not a physical seeing, we still note it as seeing, and the attention can be placed on the heart base at that time. Mind and matter, or Nāma and Rūpa, also occur in the moment of the actions that we perform, such as bending or stretching, sitting down, standing up, rising, falling, and so on. And therefore all the activities that we do have to be observed at the very moment that we perform them, so that we can see accurately the mind and matter that occurs at that time. When the obstacles to concentration are removed, so that that means that when no defilements are arising, in particular greed and anger, then the yogi comes to know that the rising of the abdomen is one process. The falling of the abdomen is a different process. Sitting is another process. Touching is another process. So they come to see very clearly rising isn't mixed up with falling. For example, falling isn't mixed up with rising. They're very distinct. The physical objects are very distinct, one from another. And further, the yogi knows that the noting or knowing of the rising is one thing. Noting or knowing of the falling is another thing. So the yogi can see the difference between different mental processes. And then further, the yogi knows that the rising movement is one thing, one process, and knowing of it is another process. The falling movement is one process, and knowing it or noting it is another process. So the yogi comes to know how to distinguish between each bodily and mental process. And this knowledge comes from simply noticing and not from reasoning, not from thinking it out. And also the way the yogi comes to know sense experience is very distinct. For example, in seeing, the yogi comes to know that the eye base is one thing. And knows it as separate from all the other parts of seeing. Or the sight, the visible object, is another thing. Seeing of these is another thing. And from time to time, various mental factors become apparent, such as the mind has the nature of going towards the object, or inclining towards the object, or knowing the object. Whereas the physical it doesn't have that quality. So this is an example of how the parts of the experience as mental and physical become apparent to the yogi. So in general, the mental processes have that quality of knowing the object, and the physical processes don't have the nature to know the object or to incline towards an object or to recognize an object. That's strictly mental. So the yogi comes to see very clearly how mind and matter are different. At the maturity of this stage of knowledge, which is called the discernment of mind and matter, the yogi knows that at the moment of breathing in, there's only the rising movement. and knowing of that. Besides that, there's no self. Although we use terms like man or woman or self or soul, outside of that mental and physical phenomena, the rising movement and the knowing of it, there's no separate process that you can label as man or woman or self or soul. Discerning mind and matter in this way arises naturally through application of the practice, and it is the necessary foundation for further knowledge to develop. So you all are well on the way to experiencing it, or you've already experienced it, and so you can know from listening to this. And I hope that you all will get the benefits that you so desire from your retreat. That's all for tonight. And I'd like to add one thing, which is just that I mentioned many things. Sometimes yogis experience a lot of them. Sometimes yogis experience just one type of experience that tells them in these ways, in some way, that mind and matter are different. So this is, it's not a matter of experiencing every single type of thing that has been mentioned. You will know from your practice if you've experienced this or not. So that's all. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.